When the Mediterranean still gleamed as the center of civilization, the Roman Empire stood as the mightiest edifice ever raised by mortal hands. From the misty hills of Britannia to the sun-scorched sands of North Africa, from the vineyards of Gaul to the marble forums of the Eternal City, Rome had bound 100 nations beneath the eagle and the law. For centuries, its legions had turned back the tide of barbarians, its roads had carried the commerce of the world, and its emperors had been hailed as gods on earth. Yet by the middle of the 4th century after Christ, cracks had begun to spiderweb through that colossal monument. The empire that had once conquered the known world now struggled to defend its own shrinking borders. Its armies, once filled with citizen soldiers who fought for glory and the Republic, were now largely composed of barbarian federates whose loyalty was purchased with gold and land. Its treasury groaned under the weight of endless taxation. Its fields lay fallow as small farmers sank into debt and serfdom, and its emperors, divided between East and West, ruled from distant palaces while corruption and intrigue festered in the halls of power. The old gods were dying. Christian bishops preached in the temples where Jupiter and Mars had once received sacrifice. Pagan philosophers lamented the loss of ancient virtues, while fervent believers proclaimed the coming of a new kingdom not of this world. The citizenry, once proud and martial, had grown weary of war and taxes, content to let others bleed for the purple. And from the vast windswept steppes of Central Asia came a storm unlike any the world had seen. They called themselves the Huns, savage horsemen who lived in the saddle, whose arrows flew like dark rain, and whose very name struck terror into the hearts of the Germanic tribes that stood between them and the Roman frontier. Behind the Huns rolled a wave of fear and desperation that no treaty or wall could contain. Entire nations uprooted themselves, fleeing westward in search of safety, food, and new lands. Among them were the Visigoths, proud, warlike, and now broken by hunger and the shadow of the Hun. In the year 376 AD, they stood on the northern bank of the Danube River, a desperate multitude begging the Roman Emperor Valens for permission to cross into the empire's sheltering embrace. What followed was no simple migration of refugees. It was the first breach in a dam that had held for centuries, a single act of imperial calculation, poisoned by greed and mismanagement, would unleash forces that neither Roman steel nor Christian prayer could ultimately restrain. This is the story of how the greatest empire the world had ever known was not felled by a single cataclysm, but slowly devoured from within by economic exhaustion, political corruption, military dependence, and the quiet erosion of the very spirit that had made Rome eternal. The barbarians who crossed the Danube did not destroy Rome. They merely delivered the final blows to a civilization already bleeding from 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. The Hunnic storm had come. The Gothic migration had begun, and the long twilight of the Western Roman Empire was at hand. In the year 376 AD, the vast frontiers of the Roman Empire trembled under a force that no legion had yet encountered. From the endless steppes of Central Asia came the Huns, fierce nomadic horsemen, whose lightning raids and unparalleled savagery shattered the fragile balance of power along the Danube River. Entire tribes fled before them, and among the most desperate were the Visigoths, a Gothic people who had long traded and occasionally clashed with Roman outposts. Starving and terrified, these migrants begged Emperor Valens for permission to cross the mighty Danube and seek refuge within the empire's borders. Valens, ruling from Constantinople, while his western counterpart, Gratian, handled threats along the Rhine, saw opportunity in the crisis. The empire's legions were stretched thin, and the Visigoths represented a ready source of hardy recruits. Officials were dispatched to ferry the Goths across in boats and barges, promising land and provisions in exchange for military service. Yet corruption infected every level of the Roman administration. Food supplies were withheld or sold at extortionate prices, and families were separated or exploited. What began as a controlled resettlement quickly descended into chaos and open rebellion. By late 376 and into 377, the Visigoths, joined by bands of Alans and even some Huns, roamed freely through Thrace, burning villas and ambushing supply trains. Roman attempts to contain them failed miserably, exposing the decay that had already weakened the once invincible border defenses. Forts stood undermanned, taxes had grown crushing, and the professional legions of old had been diluted by barbarian auxiliaries whose loyalty proved conditional at best. The empire's internal rot, economic strain from endless campaigns and political infighting, now invited the very invaders it had once repelled. The migration of 376 was no mere border incident. It marked the beginning of a cascade of invasions that would dismantle the Western Roman Empire piece by piece, transforming proud provinces into battlegrounds and foreshadowing the collapse that loomed just decades ahead. The summer of 378 AD brought the empire face to face with its greatest military humiliation since the days of Hannibal. Emperor Valens, eager to claim glory and reinforce his eastern throne, marched a massive Roman army against the Gothic rebels near the city of Adrianople in Thrace. Confident in his numerical superiority and the discipline of his legions, Valens ignored advice to wait for reinforcements from his nephew Gratian in the west. The Goths, under their leader Fritigern, had formed a defensive wagon lager on the plains, their cavalry hidden and ready. On August 9th, the battle erupted in blistering heat. Roman infantry charged prematurely, only to be enveloped by Gothic horsemen who emerged from the hills like a thunderbolt. The legions broke under the onslaught. Thousands were slaughtered where they stood, their heavy armor no match for the mobility of the barbarian riders. Valens himself fell in the melee. His body never recovered, and 2/3 of the Eastern Field Army perished in a single afternoon. Adrianople was not simply a defeat. It was the death knell of the old Roman military machine. In the aftermath, the Balkans lay open to Gothic depredations for years. Cities were sacked, countryside ravaged, and the empire's prestige shattered. The survivors of the Roman elite now understood that survival required new strategies and new leadership. Into this vacuum stepped Flavius Theodosius, a capable Spanish general recalled from retirement and proclaimed Emperor of the East in 379 AD. Theodosius immediately set about rebuilding the shattered armies, recruiting heavily from the very Goths who had defeated Valens. His early campaigns restored a fragile order, but the lesson of Adrianople endured. The empire could no longer rely solely on its traditional legions. Internal decay, corruption in recruitment, declining citizen enlistment, and reliance on barbarian federates had become the new reality. Theodosius's rise signaled both hope and the irreversible shift toward a hybrid Roman-barbarian world. Theodosius I, later called the Great, dedicated his reign to restoring imperial unity and enforcing religious orthodoxy. In 380 AD, he issued the Edict of Thessalonica, declaring Nicene Christianity the sole legitimate faith of the empire and suppressing pagan temples and heresies alike. This bold move solidified the Christian character of Roman rule, but deepened divisions within a society still clinging to ancient gods and traditions. Theodosius waged relentless campaigns against the Goths, finally compelling them in 382 AD to accept a treaty of federation. They received land in Thrace and Moesia in return for providing soldiers under their own leaders. By 394 AD, Theodosius had crushed the last major Western usurper at the Battle of the Frigidus, briefly reuniting the entire empire under his sole rule. Yet the cost was enormous. The Western armies were depleted and the Eastern treasury strained. On January 17th, 395 AD, Theodosius died in Milan, leaving the empire permanently divided between his young sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. The division, intended as an administrative convenience, proved fatal. The wealthy, urbanized East would survive. The agrarian, frontier-battered West would not. Under Theodosius, economic pressures intensified. Heavy taxation to fund endless wars and church construction drained the provinces, while inflation from earlier currency debasement continued to erode purchasing power. Large senatorial estates grew richer as small farmers fell into debt and serfdom. The reliance on Gothic federates, though militarily necessary, planted seeds of future disloyalty. Internal decay accelerated as court intrigue replaced decisive governance. Theodosius's legacy was thus bittersweet. He preserved the empire for one more generation, yet his death in 395 AD unleashed the centrifugal forces. Barbarian ambition, economic collapse, and divided loyalties that would destroy the West. The young Honorius, barely 11 years old, inherited the Western throne under the iron regency of Flavius Stilicho, a half-Vandal general of proven loyalty. Stilicho's task was monumental: defend Italy and the Rhine while containing the restless Visigoths, now led by the ambitious Alaric. Alaric, a former Roman officer, had served under Theodosius, but now demanded land, gold, and high command for his people. Repeated negotiations failed, as Honorius's court, safe behind the marshes of Ravenna, refused concessions. Stilicho repelled Alaric's first invasions of Italy in 402 and 403, winning hard-fought victories at Pollentia and Verona. Yet the West's resources dwindled. The Rhine frontier, stripped of troops to meet Italian threats, cracked in 406 when Vandals, Alans, and Suebi poured across the frozen river into Gaul, burning cities and carving out kingdoms. Britain slipped away entirely. Economic collapse deepened. Lost tax revenues from Gaul and the need for ever larger bribes to barbarians bankrupted the treasury. Court jealousies finally destroyed Stilicho. In 408, Honorius, manipulated by anti-barbarian factions, ordered his execution on trumped-up charges of treason. The murder of Stilicho and the massacre of barbarian families in Roman service ignited a final crisis. Alaric, now unopposed, marched on Rome itself. The once mighty Western army dissolved into feuding factions, its loyalty shattered by internal betrayal. The regency of Stilicho revealed the empire's fatal weakness. Without a strong central authority, barbarian generals became kingmakers, and economic ruin made sustained defense impossible. By 408 AD, Alaric's Visigoths blockaded Rome, demanding enormous ransom in gold, silver, and spices. The Senate, stripped of real power, paid what it could, yet Alaric returned in 410 after further broken promises. On August 24th, 410 AD, the unthinkable occurred. For the first time in nearly 8 centuries since the Gauls in 390 BC, foreign enemies breached the eternal city's walls. Slaves opened the gates and Gothic warriors poured through the streets. The sack lasted only 3 days, but its psychological impact was cataclysmic. Churches were respected under Alaric's Christian orders, yet palaces, temples, and villas were looted. Thousands were killed or enslaved. The city's ancient wealth vanished into barbarian camps. Honorius, safe in Ravenna, reportedly learned of Rome's fall while feeding his pet chickens and remarked that he thought the city was merely a bird. The gulf between emperor and subjects could not have been wider. Alaric died shortly afterward in southern Italy, his dream of a Gothic Roman kingdom unfulfilled. His followers under Adolf eventually moved north into Gaul. Yet the sack of 410 exposed Rome's vulnerability forever. Economic collapse accelerated as trade routes collapsed and provincial taxes dried up. Internal decay, corrupt officials, absentee emperors, and a military composed largely of unreliable federates had invited the disaster. The event reverberated across the empire and beyond. Pagans blamed Christianity for abandoning the old gods. Christians saw divine judgment. In truth, it marked the irreversible decline of the Western Roman world. The decades following 410 witnessed relentless barbarian incursions that stripped the West of its richest provinces. The Vandals, Alans, and Suebi, who had crossed the Rhine in 406, now carved out territories in Spain and pushed toward Africa. In 429, under their king Geiserich, the Vandals crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and began the systematic conquest of North Africa. the empire's breadbasket. Roman attempts to halt them failed as local governors defected or fled. Economic collapse became total. The loss of African grain and olive oil revenues starved Rome and crippled imperial finances. Currency was further debased, inflation soared, and taxation grew so oppressive that landowners abandoned estates rather than pay. Cities shrank as aqueducts fell into disrepair and trade evaporated. Large rural estates turned inward, their owners fortifying villas and relying on private armed retainers. The old Roman civic spirit vanished, replaced by feudal-like arrangements. Internal decay manifested in endless usurpations and assassinations. Emperors in Ravenna became puppets of military strongmen, while the Senate lost all influence. The Western army, now almost entirely barbarian, fought for pay and plunder rather than loyalty to Rome. Honorius died in 423, succeeded by a series of weak rulers amid constant civil wars. By 430 AD, the Western Empire controlled little more than Italy and fragments of Gaul. The pattern was clear. Barbarian invasions exploited internal weaknesses, and economic ruin made recovery impossible. The Vandal kingdom in Africa under Gothic became the West's most dangerous foe. By 439, they had seized Carthage, establishing a naval power that dominated the Mediterranean. Raids on Sicily and Italy followed, while the loss of African taxes pushed the Western treasury into bankruptcy. Emperors resorted to desperate measures, stripping precious metals from public monuments and churches. In 455, after the assassination of Emperor Valentinian III by rivals, Gothic sailed to Rome with a fleet. For 2 full weeks in June 455, the Vandals looted the city systematically, far more thoroughly than Alaric had. They carried off the treasures of Jerusalem that Titus had brought centuries earlier, along with countless statues, artworks, and captives, including the Empress and her daughters. Rome's remaining grandeur was stripped bare. The second sack accelerated the empire's fragmentation. Gaul and Spain fell further under barbarian control as Visigoths, Burgundians, and Franks expanded their kingdoms. Internal decay reached its nadir. Generals like Ricimer installed and deposed emperors at will, treating the purple as a disposable commodity. Economic life ground to a halt outside fortified enclaves. The Vandal triumph in Africa and the sack of 455 demonstrated that the Western Empire had become a hollow shell. Its provinces lost, its economy shattered, and its authority reduced to the whim of barbarian warlords. The 400s brought a new terror from the east. Attila the Hun, the scourge of God, whose vast confederation threatened both Roman empires. After ravaging the Balkans and extracting tribute from Constantinople, Attila turned westward in 451, invading Gaul with an army said to number 500,000. Roman general Flavius Aetius, the last great defender of the West, forged an unlikely alliance with Visigoths, Franks, and Burgundians. On the Catalonian plains near Chalons in 451, the combined forces met Attila in one of the largest battles of antiquity. After a day of ferocious fighting, Attila withdrew, his invasion checked. Yet the victory came at terrible cost. Aetius's coalition dissolved soon afterward. The following year, Attila invaded Italy itself, sacking cities and advancing toward Rome until persuaded to withdraw. Legend credits Pope Leo I, but the reality was likely plague and supply shortages. Attila's death in 453 from a drunken hemorrhage caused his empire to collapse overnight, freeing the West from the Hunnic threat. Yet the respite was illusory. Aetius, the architect of survival, was assassinated by Emperor Valentinian III in 454, who was himself murdered the next year. The West had exhausted its last reserves of military talent and political stability. Attila's campaigns highlighted the empire's reliance on barbarian allies and its inability to mount independent defense, hastening the final collapse. After the Vandal sack and the deaths of Valentinian and Aetius, the Western Empire entered its terminal phase. A succession of short-lived emperors, 9 in 20 years, were installed and removed by barbarian generals. Chief among them, Ricimer, a Suebian Gothic warlord who ruled from behind the throne. Italy itself became a battlefield of rival factions while provinces slipped away entirely. In 475, the general Orestes, a former secretary to Attila, proclaimed his young son Romulus emperor, derisively called Augustulus, Little Augustus. The boy, barely 12, reigned from Ravenna as a figurehead. Orestes refused to grant land to the barbarian troops who had supported him, sparking revolt. In 476, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, leading a coalition of Heruli, Sciri, and other federates, marched on Ravenna. Orestes was captured and executed. Romulus Augustulus was deposed on September 4, 476, and sent into comfortable retirement. Odoacer, refusing the imperial title, ruled Italy as king while sending the Western imperial regalia to Emperor Zeno in Constantinople. The Western Roman Empire had ceased to exist as a political entity. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus was not a dramatic battle, but the quiet acknowledgement of a reality long evident. Rome no longer ruled the West. Internal decay, decades of usurpation, assassination, and military dependence on barbarians had reached its logical end. Economic collapse left no funds for armies or administration. The fall was complete. With the deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire vanished from history. Odoacer's kingdom in Italy, the Visigothic realm in Spain and southern Gaul, the Vandal state in Africa, the Burgundian and Frankish territories in the north, all replaced the once unified Roman order. Centralized administration, uniform law, and imperial taxation disappeared. Trade routes that had linked the Mediterranean for centuries withered. Cities contracted as aqueducts crumbled and forums stood empty. The transition to what historians later termed the Dark Ages was gradual yet profound. Literacy declined outside monastic enclaves. Classical knowledge preserved in Eastern libraries faded in the West. Coinage grew scarce, replaced by barter and local currencies. Large-scale building ceased, and the grand engineering feats of Rome, roads, bridges, baths, fell into ruin. The barbarian kingdoms adopted Roman titles and laws selectively, but the unified civilization that had spanned from Britain to North Africa was gone. Economic collapse left Europe fragmented and impoverished for generations. Internal decay had eroded the civic virtues and institutional strength that once sustained the empire. Barbarian invasions had merely delivered the final blows to a body already dying from within. Yet from these ashes, new forms would eventually emerge. The fusion of Roman, Christian, and Germanic elements would give birth to medieval Europe centuries later. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD did not end history. It closed one magnificent chapter and opened another, darker one, that would define the West for half a millennium. The Eternal City had fallen, and with it, the ancient world passed into memory. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this and would like to see more, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Make sure to hit the bell so you are notified when a new video is dropped. Until next time, uncover the truth and question the past.